So just in time. So Mike, we'll jump straight into it. Looking forward to this. Obviously, the three pillars for effective business intelligence governance, and governance being a huge topic with a big resurgence. So yeah, we'll ask you to jump straight in if you want to give yourself a very brief introduction into kind of your background and story, and then yeah, we'll let you crack on with your presentation.
Yeah, great. I'll put my video on here as well.
Yeah.
And just checking the audio is fine. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can see you, we can hear you, we're all good.
Okay, let me share my screen as well, and then we'll get started here.
There we go, we can see you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Mike Smitheman. I work for a company called Metric Insights. We obviously play in the business intelligence and governance space. And I'm going to be talking today about sort of BI governance and what it is, and how you might be thinking about it in your organization. And obviously over here at Metric Insights, we're putting a lot of thought into how to solve some of these challenges. And we're going to be looking at sort of what effective governance is, and talk about sort of a life cycle of steps that you might think about in your organization when it comes to implementing some of these things. And then I believe we're going to leave some time at the end for Q&A if we have any. So yeah, I know you would have all been hearing or involved with discussions around data governance. It seems to be sort of the latest hot topic, as you were just mentioning, in the BI and analytics community. And without a doubt, effective governance programs need to look at data and how it's being managed or used within the organization. But reality is that governance programs are often falling short of their potential if they solely focus on sort of the data side of things. And the reason I say that is if you think about it, the majority of people within your organization who aren't analysts or data scientists, but who sit in quote unquote the business roles out there, they're consuming data through analytics, reports, dashboards, spreadsheets, operational applications, wherever it might be. And if we start to think of governance at this layer as well as the underlying data, then governance programs become much more effective, and the whole organization can start to benefit from governance. I think maybe controversially or not, I'd suggest whenever the term governance gets thrown out there, there's sort of this collective groan across the organization because it's seen like a barrier to doing anything. And that really shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be this necessary evil. Effective governance should make for more effective BI and analytics. And that's BI and analytics that everyone wants to use and that they can trust. And so, let's start today by talking about maybe, what does effective BI governance look like if we're going to apply it to sort of the whole stack of analytics? Well, first off, we should really look at this happy coexistence between security and discoverability. And by that, I mean, you've probably got hundreds and thousands of reports out there in your organization, but you shouldn't be locking all those down. Sure, certain reports need to be secure. They need to have compliance associated with your financial reports, whatever it might be. But everything else should really be discoverable in the organization, because if it's not, then it's going to drive sort of duplicative effort, duplicative content that's out there. And so in a well-governed environment, we see this balance between security and discoverability. The other thing to think about is, if you look at most BI environments out there, they're a sprawling mess, right? There's duplicative and obsolete content, often hiding what you actually want people to be using. It's more like a jungle than a garden. And so governance should give you a process where you're better able to maintain a garden of content that's useful to the users. All too often today, I think we spend all our time sort of discussing the validity of data and reports rather than using them. and using them and understanding what they're telling you. And effective governance should start to introduce this level of trust between the creators of the content and the people using it, and also the data itself. And you'll see that in an effectively governed environment. And if we're going to make an effort to understand how effective our BI programs are, oftentimes we'll look at sort of usage of reports. Are the reports we're putting out there actually getting used? But if you look at a typical enterprise today, and I'd encourage you to do this if you're not doing this in your organization, and you focus on the usage of the licenses that you're paying for your BI tools, and even take a long cohort, give yourself a chance look at the last 6 or 9 months. How many of those licenses are being used at all? Because it's not unusual, I'm telling you now, in large organizations, for more than half the licenses that you're paying for to be never used. People have given up using BI. They'd rather pick up the phone than use a tool out there. And that shouldn't be the case in a well-governed environment. And finally, maybe most importantly, we want to be making much more effective usage of our BI resources. So all too often, BI teams are fighting fires. They're reacting to frustrations from the business. They're repeating work because they can't remember what's out there already, and generally not using their time in the most effective way. And in a well-governed environment, that shouldn't be the case. So these are the sort of things that we want to strive for when we talk about having an effective governance program for BI. Now, reality is achieving a well-governed environment these days is actually quite challenging, and not least because we're not dealing often with a single tool or platform. As mentioned before, users are typically accessing reports in multiple different tools and technologies, from your comprehensive BI tools like a Tableau or Power BI, to spreadsheets, to reporting and operational applications. Maybe there's data science applications out there. And all these tools have varying levels of capabilities when it comes to effectively governing the content in there. And some tools, spreadsheets may have none at all. And so trying to govern everything at the tool level is probably an impossible task. And so, let's talk about sort of these 3 pillars, if you like, these 3 areas that you can put some focus into to help drive some of those challenges and some of those areas that we were just talking about. And the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of applying data literacy in terms of governance. If you govern your content effectively, it should promote data literacy across the organization. As we said before, trying to do that at the individual tool level is challenging. So, technology is needed in these processes in this way as much as the processes themselves. And so the first thing that I would say you should think about is to look at having a single point of access for users within the organization. Think of it as a portal or a catalog where you can hide the complexities of the underlying technologies that reporting and BI exists in. And give users one place to search and find things. Because if you do that, then you also have a place where you can publish content in a consistent way with some of the things that we're going to go on and talk about. I mentioned this before in the sort of first slide. So governance and access isn't just about security and compliance also. So, yes, security is key, compliance is key within the organization, and content, within this centralized space that we just spoke about should inherit security and permissions from the organizational security or the underlying tools, wherever you're managing it. But there should be this ability to discover content. There should be this ability for users to be able to search for reports that they might be interested in, even if they don't have access to the actual report itself. They should be able to look for reports, see the context behind a report, understand the intent of a report without actually having access to it, and then have a way of requesting access to that report if it's something they deem useful. Because again, without that, what happens? Well, I want to know if a report is out there. I can only see what I have access to. It's not out there what I need. So I pick up the phone and I request that report to be built. The person building it doesn't know it's out there already. And we end up creating a lot of duplicative content and effort in the organization. So balancing security and discoverability is key as well. And in order for users to find those reports and understand them, and indeed understand the reports that they do have access to, there should be a level of standardized metadata capture and tagging and documentation that's provided when you publish that content. So when a report gets published into this centralized portal, I should be able to add the necessary metadata, things like who owns it, what are the definitions and terms that are used in that report, and how they defined and calculated. Maybe categorization of the report in terms of how it should be used. Does it contain sensitive information? Is it publicly facing information? Everything I need to understand, A, how to use that report, or B, whether it's a report that I want access to, even if I don't have access to it today. And then finally, in this piece, the concept of publishing content in a certified way. So there is a lot of content out there in organizations. Some of it is useful, some of it isn't. And so when content gets published, we should assign a level of certification to it that is relevant to the process that content has been through, the checks and balances that content has had, maybe a simple bronze, silver, gold, so that a user accessing a particular report knows that it is gold certified, and therefore it has been through a series of checks and balances, and I know I can trust that particular piece of content. So this first piece is all about getting a single point of access for BI in your organization, using that to encourage search and discoverability, having a standard way of documenting and categorizing content so users understand how to use it, and certifying content so that they know they can trust it as well. The second pillar is around resource optimization. And by this, I mean the content as well as the people creating the content. If you think about most organizations, reality is it's kind of a whoever shouts loudest wins type environment. The people who use reports are the ones who ask for them. And it's unsurprising that that's where we focus our effort, because someone asks for a report, you create it, everyone's happy, everyone feels good about themselves. But what about those 50% of people out there who are not using BI in the organization? Well, that's an untapped opportunity that we should be thinking about. And so we should take more of an analytical approach to where we spend our resources and where we spend our time. And it should take into account, obviously, the content and how it's being used. It should take into account that license spend that we spoke about before, and the time that our team is taking to generate ultimately better engagement and ROI with the content that we're putting out there. I think we can use a pretty simple process to talk about how this might happen. And it starts with, understanding what you have today from a content perspective. So tracking usage and gathering feedback on the reports that are out there that you're maintaining today, and using that to identify ultimately gaps or opportunities where you can build or deploy new content. And reality is, in most organizations, this happens, and the process stops there. And that shouldn't be the case. We should go on to continually measure engagement of the content that we're publishing. If you think about most reports and you look at engagement, there's typically sort of a curve associated with it. When you first promote it, everyone comes in and uses it. They get usage. If it's a good report, they'll continue to use it. But every report has a shelf life, because the business changes, the way we measure things change, new people come on board. And so over time, whether it's a week, a month, 6 years, that report will end up getting no usage at some point. And we need to understand that engagement and recognize it happens, and then use that to promote and purge content that's in the library. And if we do that on a continual basis and we continue to optimize around that, we end up with this library of content that is relevant and useful to the business, and that we can optimize our licenses around. So we should only pay for licenses for people who are using that library of content that we are deemed is valuable and getting engagement, and there's no waste out there. And obviously, as we spoke about before, we can manage the team more effectively then, so that they're maintaining a set of useful content, they're not maintaining a bunch of junk, and that they're putting their time into creating high value assets for the organization. So resource optimization is about tracking usage of the content and gathering feedback, and doing that in a consistent way through this centralized portal that we're talking about. Managing your license utilization around that. So don't hold on to licenses that you're not using, but provision licenses for people that want to use BI who perhaps haven't now. And having this effective life cycle of content promotion and deprecation. And the final piece I'd like to talk about is the concept of trust in the organization. So yeah, I think this is seen through and through. Oops, sorry. Just bring this back up. Wrong button there. I think this is seen through and through that oftentimes in organizations there's this lack of trust, both in data and content, but also between business and BI teams. We get this friction occurring where BI teams are spending inordinate amounts of time creating reports and dashboards. Users are overwhelmed with content because they don't know what they should be using. They get frustrated because they can't find what they're using, so they pick up the phone to the BI team and ask for content that has already been created. And there's this continual cycle and friction going on in a lot of cases. And it's, in some respects, it's no one's fault. Everyone, the business wants to use data, the BI team wants to create data. It's just there isn't an effective process in place for managing that. We end up with this lack of trust. And I think what we need to recognize is that striving for perfection in the process is not the right way to maintain trust, because however good you are, things are never 100% perfect 100% of the time. And oftentimes it's out of your control. You put a lot of time into creating reports and analytics and dashboards, and you ensure the data is in there, and it's correct and well defined. But then, data pipelines fail, networks go down, systems go down, data gets corrupted, and suddenly, all that effort's gone out the window because something is incorrect all of a sudden. But if we establish that things aren't going to be 100% correct 100% of the time, the key in a well-governed environment is to just ensure transparency around that. I don't believe you lose trust with the business because there's problems in a particular report on a particular day. I think you lose trust because they're the ones telling you about it, right? They're the ones who discover that there's a problem with that report after they've spent 3 hours trying to figure out why the number was something that they weren't expecting. So the key to maintaining trust in a well-governed environment is transparency around that. And how do you do that? Well, you implement your data quality checks, you implement your pipeline checks, you implement your analytics checks to hopefully automate the process of alerting people around issues in the data as they occur. And you use that to drive the concepts of announcements within the organization. And those announcements should be tailored to the users and tagged to the content that it affects. So within, say, a portal where you're pushing out all this content, if I open a particular report and I'm looking at it and there's an issue with it, it should be front and center on that report that there is an issue. It should be within that report, and it should be as tailored as possible so that, it's not just telling me, hey, there's a problem, good luck. It's saying, hey, there is a problem. The data up to yesterday is correct. Everything today, ignore. Expect to get an update at 3 o'clock this afternoon, and everything should be good to go. We're aware of what's going on. And as much as you can automate that messaging, which should be possible if you are creating sort of this single centralized environment, it kind of takes the people risk out of getting the communication out to people. And you can also iterate on the communication. So if the data pipeline fails, generate an automatic alert on that particular dashboard that it affects, and then come back and update it as you understand more about the problem and communicate more. So trust is about, again, recognizing that things aren't perfect all the time, but communicating, being proactive around that communicating and tailoring the message to the users. So, yep. I'm going to wrap up with one final slide, and just to summarize, and then let's see if there's any questions out there. But again, what you should be striving for with governance in a BI environment is, again, making sure people can find the valuable content that you're putting out there. In order to do that, you need to maintain a very concise and useful library content that is relevant all the time. In doing that, you should be generating a high level of trust with the business users out there. And if you're doing all that, you're probably better at generating an ROI on your BI programs, because you're seeing a better utilization of the licenses that you're paying for and a better utilization of the team that's out there.
Yep. Perfect. Really interesting, Mike. I think and audience, if there's questions, please get them in so that we can address them to Mike. But I think what you said at the start of the presentation, Mike, was really interesting. Obviously, the term governance has had this whole resurgence right over the last 12 to 18 months, and several theories on that. I think often a lot of organizations got dragged into trying to do initiatives in the realms of data science and AI and things like that, where they probably weren't quite ready for that and have managed to trace their tails back to this whole governance piece. A lot of really good messages there around trust and literacy. Keen to get your thoughts on one thing, so I'll ask you your first question. I guess completely get the difference between data governance and then governance around BI and analytics, right, to drive further adoption and optimization, etc. How does this often play out when you're getting a lot of organizations trying to move to a self-serve environment? And is there a difference between the two?
Well, no, I think it's it's a key point to enabling self-service, right? And in fact, I did another presentation on this the other week, which was all around everyone is striving to democratize data and analytics and drive self-service and put everything out there so that people have access to it and use it. And the irony is, if you're not governing all that content that's out there, it's a complete mess, and no one's going to use it, and no one's going to self-serve around it. So I think let's not kid ourselves here. Data governance and what I term BI governance is very closely related and often overlapping, right? If you can govern the data in an effective way, if you can govern the analytics in an effective way, and you can put it out there in a discoverable way, then users should be able to self-serve. And I would say, I think we get into, fairly myopic views and definitions of self-service as well. Self-service can be everything from, taking a data set and working with it, and that data set should be governed and certified and accurate and have context. Self-service can also be, I'm the guy in the business, I look at reports for a couple of minutes every day. I should be able to find those reports and use them without having to pick up the phone to the BI team. So I think governance really enables self-service, because without it, it just becomes this mess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd agree. I think even the around the realms of data governance, right, that's had this resurgence because now business leaders understand, they're not doing data governance for the sake of doing data governance. They're doing it because they know it enables better BI and analytics, right? Which obviously drives better decision making and so on and so forth. So.
Yeah, and the other thing I would caution just across the board, whether it's data governance, BI governance, governance in general, is we shouldn't just govern for governance sake as well, right? There is different levels of governance that is required based on what the data is or what the reports are, right? So I don't need to put the same level of scrutiny into a report that is used in my team once a month and no one else sees it, compared to the financial reports that go out to the street every quarter, right? So my report that I create in my team does not need that level of scrutiny. That means it takes 4 weeks for anyone to actually see the report, right? But on the flip side, that is required. We should be applying it. So yes, governance is important, but the appropriate level of governance is important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Mike, thank you very much for your presentation, and also thank you for you and your business for being the platinum sponsor today.